listening to Season 1 of the Get Started podcast, the podcast show set to reveal fintech's brightest founders. We've kicked off with 9 fintech leaders recording live at Europe's biggest fintech show, Money2020. Stay tuned and email us at contact@getstarted.media if you'd like to feature.
I'm here at Money2020, day 2. It's been a busy day so far. People looking a tiny bit worse for wear today, but still full of energy. And I'm very happy to be here with James Hill, the CEO of Flexys. So hi, James, and welcome.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. If you could, before we start to talk a bit about what it's like being a leader in fintech today and the journey, your journey at Flexys so far, could you just set the scene for us? What's Flexys, for those that don't know?
Yeah, of course. So Flexys provides enterprise organizations with real-time collection software. So our software helps our clients across banking, utilities, retail, financial services, collect outstanding debt quicker whilst providing a sensitive, tailored and customer-centric approach. Vision of the company is obviously to be the global technology leader of choice, as everyone says, but really for every organisation who's looking to protect their revenue whilst delivering better customer experiences and better customer outcomes.
Sounds like something we all want.
Absolutely.
And could you tell me a little bit about your role there and what brought you to Flexys? What motivated you to join?
Yeah, so it was interesting. I was working at a edtech SaaS business, like a global PLC, and I guess first and foremost, it was an unbelievable referral for the business. So a previous colleague of mine was working as CFO at Flexys. Mm-hmm. She rang me up and said, I'm at this fintech business. I'll tell you a little bit about what they do. You probably won't understand it, but they're scaling and they're looking for someone to come in. And I joined Flexys in January 22 as COO at the time.
Then what was that transition through to leading?
Yeah, so then in the September, so we started talking about it in the sort of April, May time, and we were looking at how we were going to take the business on that scale-up journey and what we needed to do. So we almost started thinking about that sort of post-Series A structure a little bit earlier. So we were thinking about how we moved sales and marketing into more of a process-driven sales and marketing function, how we took professional services and optimized it. And so we worked on that alongside the growth plan for about 6 months with the founding team. And then September 22 was when I moved into the CEO role.
Sounds like a very natural flow to have joined at that time while the business was going through that.
Yeah, it was. I mean, for me, I'd always led really large teams. So when I joined Flexys, my team was sort of about 175 people, globally dispersed. Coming to a fintech startup, which was using cutting edge technology with 30 people at the time, was eye-opening and was completely the opposite from everything I ever knew about business, but was just an amazing opportunity. And I think it's been a really exciting ride seeing that and being part of it.
I think I'll come back to you in a second, some questions about, being a leader in a relatively early stage business, but not being a founder. I'm interested in how that dynamic works a little bit. But before we talk about that, what some fast facts about the business in terms of size, location, sort of stage?
Yeah, okay. So we are UK based, so headquartered in Bristol. We've got a number of large household name clients, the likes of TSB, Virgin Money, Water Plus, Bamboo Loans, and really work across that whole spectrum. We've currently got 34 people in the business, and we are here because we're sort of actively now exploring taking that technology into Europe.
Okay. Any particular geographies?
So really interested, obviously, in very sort of heavily digital first countries. So Nordics is a really interesting space. Just spent some time there. Europe, Southern Europe is great. Benelux, Netherlands, we've been doing some work for the Department of Business and Trade as well in those spaces. So yeah, looking for some good opportunities.
Interesting. I wanted to ask then a question about how that works for how the solution is scalable internationally. I didn't want to go too detailed too quick, but I've asked so.
Yeah, of course. So from a product perspective, effectively we provide our clients with the ability to have their agents who manage the collections processes, but also the self-service side for their customers. And so it's a real-time 24/7 collections platform that means that customers can engage at the time that's right for them. And in terms of scalable, I mean, we are completely born in the cloud.
Yep.
It is a full Kafka microservices Kubernetes stack, and it means that we can integrate with the game changers in this space. So people like your Thought Machines and Pismos, Tombs, Ascadas, Mambu. We integrate in real time with all of those as our partners from a core perspective.
Have you found there's been more appetite then?
Yeah.
It seems like there naturally would be, given global economics and...
Yeah, and I think there's two things. I think there's economic drivers, which means that there's increasingly large amounts of bad debt. There's also drivers within financial services around that whole customer experience piece. So obviously, if you're the CFO, it's really, really easy to lend money.
Yes.
Like giving money out is the easiest thing in the world, right? But knowing that you'll be able to get it back in is a real challenge. When you optimize that process end to end, what you really get to the point is that you can grow the business faster because you can be more efficient, you can lend more because you've got more risk mitigation. And so that's a really interesting evolving space. And then you've got all of the new core providers who are talking about real time, and they are all series C, D, E, F, and G, right? So they have these huge global footprints with some of the largest banks and financial services organizations in the world. So for us, partnering with them makes it a very natural conversation around, you're going to adopt a real-time core, you should put real-time products around it.
Yeah. So bringing it back to you then, as a leader, we've interviewed over the course of this Money2020, we're going to speak to 10 founders or leaders, anybody that's a non-founder, all in startups to scale-ups. What can you categorize? What's it been like? Did you know when you joined Flexys that you wanted to lead the business? How has it been working with a founding team? Because I bet you feel like you're part of that, really.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I think, say about the moment when I decided to join and saying it was a great referral, and then the thing that happened off the back of that was meeting the founding team. And I think hearing, their passion for the space and what they'd achieved before in the same space, and what they wanted to do. For me, I looked at it as, well, it's B2B software sales, right? It's sort of the same as other things that I've done in my past. But I think hearing about the culture they were building in the organization and where they wanted to get to, that was the thing that really inspired me to come into the team. When I joined, I had no idea that plan was to go COO to CEO. So when I had that conversation at the time, and said, we're going to have look at a new CEO. My first reaction was like, I'm going to have a new boss. Who's this person? What are they going to be like? So that was a really interesting thing. But I think working closely with them, the way I always looked at it is that the founding team had to really trust me that I would look after their baby and help it grow. And so, we work in the same way. We'll have disagreements, we have agreement, that's the sort of very natural dynamic.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think we all want the same thing.
Yeah.
And so, fixate on the same goal, I think, is the alignment.
And do you know, it's not unusual, I wouldn't say it's unusual, but it is still a lot of CEOs at this stage in the business, they are often still the founder, whether that's the right person or not. It's an interesting decision, and obviously a good one for Flexys that they've brought in a CEO early-ish that isn't part of the founding team. How has that been in terms of opportunity for entrepreneurship and influence?
Yeah, I think we still leverage the relationships and connections that all of the team have and the founding team have. And I think that the thing for me was always that it was only ever going to work if we had the same alignment and we had the same goals, because ultimately it was all about scale up. And there are lots of challenges with scaling an organization. You sign that one big client and suddenly everything is haywire for a period of time. And so, I'd always spent about 10 years delivering and managing teams that were running some super large, complex projects. So I think that sort of ability to organize and put people in the right place. And for me as well, a learning curve, I guess, in terms of the difference between being a COO and a CEO, is a very different thing.
Yeah.
But in a scale up, everyone sort of does everything. And so you just have to also appreciate the fact that when something needs to get done, you've got to get it done. And when we've hired people in, and particularly when we've hired people into exec positions, I think the thing I learned over that time was I had to find someone who'd done the startup early stage journey. Because it's really difficult, and I think it's probably a hard match sometimes bringing someone in from a PLC. I think if you love global, large corporate structures, you can find that sort of startup scale-up space, really overwhelming. Yeah. And if your passion is to go and work for Salesforce or whoever it might be, then I think you should just follow your heart and go and work for Salesforce.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that. So since then, I don't know if you can give a good example of since taking leadership of the business, have there been any pivotal moments where you think you can pinpoint that was a significant step change for us in the scale-up journey?
Yeah, I mean, so I think in one way, it's a bit of a cop-out, my answer. But the thing for me is always every moment of that validation that happens. So, it could be signing that contract. We signed a contract with one of our existing clients with an extension, and that was a 9-year contract. And overwhelming. Yeah, that's a very long
big
contract.
Vote of confidence.
Yeah. And, that for us was a real game change. Our average length of contracts with our clients is all 5 years and north of 5 years. And so I think those are those sort of big things when you're like, wow.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is just, the good time after the difficult time. Sometimes you have that unexpected win, that unexpected positive thing that happens. Sometimes it can even just be a conversation with a client who just tells you how much they love the software, how much they love the team. And the thing that doesn't happen very often, but has happened once, is just that spur of the moment. I had a Slack message from one of the team who works in a completely different part of the business, just saying we do really appreciate what you do. And it was just a conversation about actually doing a reference for a house for him. But it was one of those things where you don't really ever get that feedback from the team.
No, and I think that's cultural. It's what you said though about putting culture at first, and that being important while you are scaling.
Yeah,
to keep that.
I think so, and it's a funny role. I think the thing I probably learned was that when you're in the COO role or one of the other exec positions, you are. You have your teammates around you and your colleagues who you can have those really open, honest, frank, when you're feeling something's really hard or something's really difficult and you can sort of let off steam and have those conversations. It can be quite a lonely role sometimes. I had this conversation last night when we were out having dinner with one of our partners and talking to their group CEO about this and saying, sometimes if the CEO comes to you and says, I'm having a really tough time at the moment about this, suddenly everyone's really nervous, oh my God, what's going on?
Yeah, you're like the barometer.
So you sort of can't say it.
No.
And that's an interesting thing. I think you just got to really build that peer network.
Yeah. I have to say that's one of the motivations for starting this podcast as well and speaking to leaders, founders in the space, because it's been a trialing time in fintech. We've had a boom. I'd say it's still booming really, but there's also been, some negative impact on the brand of fintech, layoffs, misspent VC funding, down rounds, pulling out of certain regions. It's been a trying time, and we're quite interested in, what's the impact been on the leaders in that space.
Yeah, and it's tough because I think sometimes, if you're selling to large enterprise organizations, they aren't the fastest people in the world to move. And, ultimately, when you're a small, scaling, challenger business, the first hurdle is even just contracting. The first hurdle, with a bank contract is always getting over the fact that you probably don't meet a lot of their criteria of businesses they can contract with.
No, and that's a lot of the time that's set in stone as well.
Yeah, and you're writing, and sometimes you find yourself writing policies and processes to align to something. I mean, I always have the conversation about Modern Slavery Act policy and, the types of organisations, the size of organisations that applies to in the UK, right? But the fact that actually for a lot of banks, they go, well, look, it's just mandatory, right? You just need to just give us one, a gifts and bribery register. We don't give gifts, we don't receive gifts. So, but
still need the policy.
Yeah, and it's challenging, and macroeconomic conditions have been tough. We've had political instability, economic instability, like those things. If you were trying to sell, and if you were trying to sell to a utility client at the back end of 2022, they had a war to think about and a supply chain that was much more significant from a gas and energy perspective than buying some new software was.
And there's definitely had to be a level of sensitivity developed as well.
Yeah.
I think that we all have had to be a little bit like that.
Yeah, I think so.
Back to, I guess, my line of questioning. We've learned to celebrate failure a little bit. Nobody's afraid of failure as much these days. Have there been any moments where you wouldn't wish to repeat them, but either you as a leader or Flexys as a business wouldn't be the same without them?
Yeah, so I think that, your experiences in business and life, I guess, good or bad, always inform what the future looks like.
Yeah.
So I think you should never really regret something to the point where you go, I wish that had never happened, because then you don't know how that would have impacted the next thing that happens. But I think for me, it's always that sort of action over inaction thing. You know, I think back to times when I knew something wasn't working or I knew something wasn't right.
Yeah.
And at the time, you know, it was obvious and we all knew that was the case. And there was sometimes you think, oh, we waited too long, we should have done something about it. And I think that's the point actually where people look to you to do something. Because as soon as they think, this isn't really working, why are you continuing with this strategy? Or, this person, or whatever it might be, this isn't the right thing to do. And I think the longer you try and persevere and keep going, or just don't ignore it, the team then look at it and go, we're lacking leadership. Yeah. So I think making those, making the decisions, if they're informed decisions, just make them quickly. And as you say, you're a scaling business. There will be good times, there will be bad times, there will be difficult decisions along the way, but ultimately you have to make them.
Yeah. What motivates you then? It's you have decisions to make, things. You've got to motivate teams. You've got to be on top of the product, making sure that that's relevant to the market, partnerships. How do you stay motivated?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I guess the two things primarily, probably my family and my team.
Yeah.
I think that for all the time and effort and sacrifices and things that we do, ultimately you've got to know that you're doing the right thing, that the outcome will be right for everybody. Yeah. You want to take everyone on this super exciting journey. And you want to get there and realize it, and whatever it might be, a big funding round, a massive exit, whatever that shape that takes. But fundamentally, that's the sort of payback for everything else that's come before it. We had a conversation recently with another business leader about the same thing. We were talking about how we prioritize our time and how we don't do too much and the things we take away. And the conversation really was that ultimately it's always the personal stuff first you take away. You never, you sort of get to your business diary later and you go, well, I could not do that, or I could not go to that.
Yeah.
I could work over that holiday. And I think that's part of that sort of sacrifice thing. But you just have to know where your line is, but also know that you're going to get somewhere in the end.
Yeah.
And that's the outcome.
And that keeps you motivated.
Yeah.
And in terms of, it's been, like you said, it's been instability all around in the world and in the fintech space. What do you think will change maybe in the next 5 to 10 years in terms of sort of macro drivers or the way we're living our lives that you think will be relevant to fintech and how that might impact the future of your business?
So I think that from a fintech perspective, what we're seeing is that there's now this like unbelievable ecosystem of companies who do everything, but are also hyper specialists in their space. We operate in a niche part of that customer and business journey, but now businesses are able to really realize the benefit of putting together those products in that ecosystem. And I think that increasingly you move away from this, there's nothing I sort of hate more than this concept that like a customer journey in financial services is like a linear action from start to finish. It is completely cyclical. Customers' circumstances change. Everything about their personal life changes in that time, and you have to be able to adapt to that, and you have to be able to offer them new products, and you have to be able to innovate.
Yeah.
And I sort of think now it's funny. I mean, I'm looking the other day, and I was thinking like I've got like 8 banking apps on my phone, right? I've got a separate mortgage account that I still have to find the piece of paper for to like log into online.
Yeah.
I've got all of these things, and I don't have any kind of personalized financial services experience. I talked to my son about it, who's 10, and to be honest with you, all of the traditional banks mean absolutely nothing to him. He has no idea really who any of them are.
No.
And they don't want to market to him.
No.
He's being marketed to by Starling, Revolut, Monzo. Like they're the sort of cool brands he knows.
Yeah.
But even then, I still think that actually in 10 years' time, I would like to think that we start to move towards that sort of almost like single pane of glass view of everything. All my accounts in one place.
It'd be lovely, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and just the ability that, people talking the other day about failed transactions on their current account, but they had money in like their space, or they had money in another account.
It happens to me all the time with Revolut.
Yeah. Because you move the money out.
Yeah.
And you don't move it back in.
I travel a lot to Portugal and I'll just forget that I've not transferred. And it'll decline. Oh.
Yeah.
Still there. The funds are there.
Yeah. And it's still being held there.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing for me, is that actually, you need banks and financial institutions will live or die by the customer experience they can deliver. And actually, could you see a world where you didn't know who provided your current account? Maybe, right? People make choices all the time about their customer experience. And if I get a thing that tells me I need to call someone between 9:30 and 4:30 because that's convenient to them or when they're open, my second thought is always, well, I could probably just close that. I'll just move somewhere else.
Yeah. It's interesting. Well, thank you. I mean, that's been a really sort of action-packed, I guess, snapshot of you as a leader and what you're doing with Flexys. Just to wrap us up a little bit, we are at Money2020. It is a showcase for what's happening. There's stands big and small, businesses old and new. What do you think about shows like this and the value that they bring, or do they bring?
Yeah, I mean, events and your values and things you want to get from events is always a bit of a tricky one when it comes to sort of marketing, sales KPIs. But I think that when you come here, and particularly for us, I mean, we operate, I say, in a niche of financial services. So when we talk to people, they go, oh, you don't do the same thing as everyone else we've just spoken to them about. I actually didn't know this existed, or what do you do? And so we've had some really great conversations. For us, it's a great opportunity to meet with our partners. A lot of our partners are here.
So the FaceTime you said, is interesting that you say that with the people that perhaps might not get that articulation of your value if they didn't have a conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I met a CPO earlier today. I sort of hijacked him on a stand when he was trying to go to another meeting. But I mean, that 10 minutes would be very difficult to get outside of Money2020. So I think you just have to make the most of it. If you come away from here having not met someone new or not learned something new or had dinner on your own,
shame on you, really.
You probably haven't. You probably haven't experienced it.
No.
Yeah.
I think that's really good advice. Thank you. Well, was there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to sort of mention before we wrap up?
No, I mean, great opportunity. Thank you for doing the podcast. Great event. And if people want to find out more, then feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and let's have a chat.
Thanks. And lovely to hear from you. And we'll be watching Flexys pretty closely, I think.
Great. Thanks, Kimberly.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Get Started Podcast, the podcast show set to reveal fintech's brightest founders, brought to you by Communications House for Entrepreneurs Started. To take part, email contact@getstarted.media or WhatsApp us on +44 7822 01 8863.